first, I want to make sure to thank you very much, Michelle Vesey and Deb High for coordinating this event and dealing with the rather challenging technical issues. And I also want to thank our two dialogue partners who have volunteered for this this journey with us, Bob Edelstein and Ruth Littman Ashkenazi, who have generously given their time to join us and illustrate this this approach. I also wanted to thank our co-sponsors, the Existential Humanistic Institute, of which I'm currently president, and the EHNW, which is Existential Humanistic Northwest, of which Bob is currently president. So thanks so much to our sponsors. Well, welcome to this experiment in deep democracy. We're truly trying something different here, folks. Very few cultures, countries, professions have dedicated themselves to not only listening to their diverse voices, but to cultivating an atmosphere where people can actually be more fully present to one another, to really hear those diverse voices with their whole body experience. We're obviously trying something quite challenging here also. We're attempting to come from a place of curiosity. How rare in our culture, in many cultures, that we attempt to come from a genuine place of being curious about the other's point of view. Especially when we're immersed in fear or anger, which tend to be the tones of much of our current situation, at least in our society. We're also attempting to come from a place of curiosity in terms of the focus on learning about and trying to understand the other. This is not about changing minds. It's not about persuading somebody that they're wrong. It's really about opening that space to understand them. I think this is something that especially you therapists in the audience can resonate with. A phenomenological space, a space of where there can be intimate understanding to the degree possible. Also, coming from curiosity in terms of getting to know people as human beings and not just their labels or their stereotypes, and seeing what we may share in common out of that experience of the humanity of the other. Where is our common humanity? Does our common humanity come out of this dialogue process? So as you can see, we are attempting to bring time-honored principles of psychotherapy, especially depth psychotherapy and psychology, to a fractured society. We're attempting to cleave beneath the behavioral and outward signs of a civil society. I think most of us would agree that we have made some progress over centuries in terms of behavioral and outward forms of civility, although clearly those are greatly challenged as well. But it seems to me and others that connect with this that we may be ready for another step in terms of relating to one another beyond the behavioral or the outward, and that is to get at our inner experience of each other. That seems to be a major hang up in terms of a lot of the upheaval we're seeing in regard to polarization, certainly racial issues, economic class issues, etc. So getting at the personal ways of being with each other is a significant part of this process. So as I say, I'm hoping that this is a next step for our democracy and republic. And I do want to mention both. I think that's important to relate that we are both a democracy and a republic with checks and balances and representatives. And can we move to this deeper place with one another in terms of relating to each other, our everyday citizens, as well as our representatives? So what we're going to witness momentarily is what I call the Experiential Democracy Dialogue. Now, this is a hybrid of my experience developing the Experiential Democracy Dialogue, which is a one-on-one dialogue with people coming from very contrasting backgrounds. I have an example of this between an African-American community activist and a white police officer that may be of interest to you on YouTube. And you can look that up under my name, Experiential Democracy Project. I would suggest the full video. So I'm coming from the place of developing this Experiential Democracy Dialogue for over a decade. And then more recently, since about 2016, I've joined a group, a grassroots citizens movement called Braver Angels. And so I'm also drawing from Braver Angels my experience as a trained moderator with Braver Angels in my latest version of the Experiential Democracy Dialogue. Braver Angels deals more with group processes. And what I'm trying to bring is more of a one-on-one intimate exchange. And I do believe very strongly that the two can complement each other. But this is something that we're evolving and inquiring into as we go along here. So just to be clear, Braver Angels is very active. They have some 10,000 members. They've been sweeping the country the last several years. What they do is bring together self-identified liberals or blues, as they call them, Democrats, and self-identified conservatives, often Republicans, for living room style group dialogue together. And what we're about to show in the demonstration is a dialogue between Bob Edelstein and Ruth Ashkenazi. Bob is a self-identified liberal Democrat, and Ruth is a self-identified moderately conservative, as I understand it, Republican. And we have given you all and them a choice about what topic to focus on, either racial issues that are currently obviously quite intense in our society right now, or polarization in regard to the pandemic and how that's being handled, or polarization in regard to our economic situation. So our dialogue partners have chosen racism as the issue of their focus for today's dialogue. And I do also want to emphasize that Bob and Ruth have been and are complete strangers, except for the last 2 weeks when I introduced them very briefly, and they had a chance to chat very briefly to get oriented to this dialogue format. But they do not know each other, and this dialogue has not been rehearsed in any way. So after the demonstration, we will then offer the Experiential Dialogue, Democracy Dialogue format to you, the audience, to break up into pairs to try out the phases. We have 6 phases to this process, to hopefully to help you enhance your capacity to be more present to the otherness in yourselves, as well as the otherness in those you work with, whether they're clients or people in the community. So with the Experiential Democracy Dialogue, I'm attempting to give away skills and resources that I have learned over these decade of years to communities, to families, and Lord knows I'm sure we all have families that have some of these splits, and we often are lost as to how do we work with this with people we know, friends, neighbors, even communal groups, students in classrooms who have particular ideological clashes, even workmates, and even, if possible, if they'll be courageous enough, legislators who would be willing to draw from this format to try to work more personally and substantively with these issues where our lives are in the balance. I can't overestimate that. So with that, I'm going to turn over a very brief introduction by Bob Edelstein to talk briefly about himself and EHNW.
Okay.
So, Bob?
Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be with all of you and my good friend Kirk. I'm passionate in the existential humanistic psychotherapy as an existential humanistic psychotherapist, and I'm in my 47th year of doing practice, whether in agency settings or my own private practice. I was with the Existential Humanistic Institute on the board from 2008 to 2012, and in 2010 started Existential Humanistic Northwest Professional Organization, which we're just completing our 10th year. We offer salons and presentations and workshops, and our vision statement is Existential Humanistic Northwest is here to impact the world through our commitment to and passion for existential humanistic values of authenticity, integrity, responsibility, inclusion, and awe. So again, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited about the workshop.
Thanks so much, Bob. I think it's very important that we begin with the ground rules for this workshop. So, as we mentioned in the online introduction, although this guideline of the 6 phases can be very helpful in applying this format, you know, with people you're working with, it is very helpful to have the book, The Depolarizing of America, as background. It has a number of caveats and background pieces of background information that are important in terms of optimizing the facilitation of this format. So this is one of the most important aspects of carrying on this dialogue, the ground rules. And these are adapted from Braver Angels format and have been quite, I think, successfully time tested. So one of the things we've learned about these kinds of conflict mediation encounters is that structure and safety are at a premium. And so a really commend you to absorb these ground rules. I'll go over it quickly. We are here to understand others and explain our views, not to convince others to change their mind. Let's try to speak for ourselves and not try to speak for or represent any outside group. Let's stick to the spirit of the activities designed, i.e. the phases in the dialogue as we go along. And otherwise, it's pretty standard stuff that most of us know, but we often don't implement. And we end up evolving into more like food fights rather than civil dialogues. So taking turns, not interrupting others, listening to others, being respectful, especially respectful of their humanity. And of course, no eye rolling or loud sighs. These nonverbal cues can be just as powerful and sometimes more powerful, powerfully negative than verbal cues. And just as a summary, bring your best selves to these dialogues. Okay, we're going to, with the audience, we're going to have you take 2 minutes to decide on which topic you're going to focus on. As I say, Bob and Ruth have already decided on racism, so I'm not going to spend much time with that setup. Then we go for them. Then we go to phase 1, which is a visualizing phase, and it's a chance for the dialogue partners to center themselves and ground themselves in their experience of themselves and of what it might be like to sit with the other. It's a kind of priming for the main event of the actual encounter. And of course, we find these kinds of, you could say, mindful primings very helpful in psychotherapy and in other conflict mediation situations. I don't think they're used enough, but it can be very helpful, and also helpful to try to open a space for the humanity of the other and not just the stereotype or the label that you immediately react to about the other's point of view. Phase 2, background. Here's a chance to get to know each other. And this is such an important component we found through the years of conflict mediation. First, you got to get to know the person as a person. Get to know a little of where they're coming from, the context out of which they're coming from, and how that context approached the issue that they're dealing with. Then we're going to go into describing the dialogue partner's stance as mindfully and heartfully as possible. And it's got those different parts. At the end of that 5 minutes, then we have the partner to the speaking partner reflect back what they heard. And the speaking partner can correct it. Phase 4 is identifying and then correcting and then admitting the various stereotypes. We found this exercise to be very potent in Braver Angels work, where people are getting many sides of the particular issue that they're representing. And in many ways, they're both owning what they believe, but also humbling themselves about what they believe. And that provides a space for more access to a discussion with each other. Then phase 5 is a chance to ask a policy question. And we try to do this again as profoundly as possible from a place of curiosity and not assumption or a kind of question with the answer in it. Finally, the last phase 6 is the discovery results. In this phase, we ask if the partner felt heard, if they related to the other's narrative, and most importantly, what was learned by each partner. And also, very importantly, Did any common ground emerge from these discoveries? Any potential action plans or seeds for future dialogues? And hopefully these are ongoing. And hopefully they'll be contagious, like a very constructive plague, let me put it that way. Okay, so that's pretty much it. At the end of our meeting at the end of your dyads, we're going to have a Q&A period, and we'll also have a Q&A period after the demo with Bob and Ruth. So now I'm going to have Bob and Ruth begin the dialogue with the first phase. So I'd like you, Bob and Ruth, to just take a few moments to become aware of your breathing. A grounding meditation can be helpful to begin turning you both inward and tuning you in more to thoughts, feelings, body sensations that come up as you visualize sitting with each other in regard to this topic of racism. Take a few moments to do that. And then I'd like you to just take a few moments to see if you can dream into the more of who your partner is, meaning that which is beyond your immediate reaction to what you sense will be their point of view. Can you see the humanity? Can you sense the humanity, the personal story that is very much a part of that person who will be sitting before you? Okay, so Bob and Ruth, I'd like to go into phase 2. And perhaps we can begin with Ruth. If you could talk we'll give you about 5 minutes about what it was like for you to grow up. Just, kind of the highlights. And how did your family system or your cultural system treat the other? And in this case, the other being the issue of race.
Sure. Thank you, Kirk. I appreciate it. So I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in a upper middle class suburb of Detroit. I'm Jewish. My mom was born in Germany, wartime Germany, and survived by virtue of the fact she was a quarter Jewish. But she witnessed the bombs, she witnessed the devastation, and she also witnessed the plight of people who lost their children, loved ones, entire families to the Nazis, a strong, centralized government run amok. So I was exposed to that history, both personal and world, through parents who opted for a much more conservative paradigm, looking at the world as one that had been plagued by the onslaught of strong centralized governments. And as I learned about refuseniks, Jews and others who were refused leave of the Soviet Union, and some of the horrors that befell them, I became myself very suspicious of strong centralized governments. And not to say that government's all bad, but it became clear to me that they were something to be feared. And that is a fear that I grew up with. And in religious school, we would role play the plight of refuseniks. And as a little kid, I had to escape the Soviet Union. The big kids were the KGB agents, and we little kids had to remember our ID numbers. And I couldn't remember mine, and I ended up underneath the principal's desk crying my eyes out. And I also had repeated dreams of being in line to exit our elementary school gymnasium This was in a dream. Several times I had this dream, and we all had guns strapped over our shoulders, and I was the only one in my class crying my eyes out because something was different, and I didn't know what it was. And as I came to find out through a sister-in-law that supposedly that kind of dream is normal for first generation, second generation kids of Holocaust survivors. One day when I was standing outside waiting for the bus and talking with my friends about boys we had crushes on, I mentioned I had a crush on Troy Simmons, cute, adorable, funny guy in my first grade class, and all the kids around me laughed at me, and I didn't know why. So when the bus came, I kind of pulled at the sleeve of an older girl, and I said, why were they laughing? And she turns to me and she says, well, because Troy is Black. And I just didn't know what to make of that. It was like a total non sequitur. I went home that day and I asked my mom why that girl would have said that. And she explained this notion of racism to me. And I sort of understood what she was saying because it resonated with the stories I'd heard about how Jews were persecuted for being Jews. And so all of that in my mind came together as a really unfortunate pattern in history where minorities are oppressed by people who, I don't know, insecure, looking for power over others. And that power motif certainly expresses it the most in my mind through people who would like more and more of it and assume strong centralized roles at the highest levels possible. And so that pretty much, Kirk, sums up why I believe what I believe politically.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And, I just want to convey to the audience that if you feel like you need more time, we unfortunately don't have the time in this kind of format, but if you feel you need more time when you do this on your own, I think it's worth taking, a few extra minutes, but there should be a cutoff to this portion. Bob, so if you could take about 5 minutes to talk about where you've come from and how the racial other was treated in your system.
Yeah, well, it's interesting in terms of what Ruth just said is I grew up in a middle-class Jewish family on Long Island. And my dad grew up where he was discriminated against. He was the only, his family was one of the only few Jewish families in a suburb of Boston. And so he did experience discrimination in different ways. And then he came to New York in the 1920s, and he had an experience where he was working for a pharmacy, and the pharmacy manager wasn't aware that he was Jewish, and he gave him this job that was really difficult. And he said, I hate to give this to you because this job isn't even fit for a Jew. And my dad, I was proud to hear when he told me he just walked out on a job at that point. So I'm feeling, and I didn't feel discrimination because Long Island had a lot of Jewish people. And so it wasn't an issue for me. But in terms of knowing the history and knowing, 6 million Jews got murdered in World War II, that I did have an affinity for Black people in terms of them being a minority. And my folks were liberal Democrats, maybe even moderate Democrats. And I remember having a few memories in terms of the relationships with Black people. One is, even though I had a belief in terms of Blacks and whites are equal, my community didn't have very many Black people. So I didn't have a sense experientially in terms of really getting to know Black people. That I do remember my uncle Paul saying, would call Black Schwarze, which is a Yiddish word meaning Blacks. It's not complimentary. And I remember just really not liking that at an age, I think maybe I wasn't even sure why I didn't like it, but I didn't. I have another memory where I was an avid baseball fan. And, even like at 5 or 6. And my favorite player was Jackie Robinson of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And he broke the color line. And I just remember thinking, boy, that's pretty cool, you know, for him to do that. And then the other memory I have when I was a kid was Howard was a black man at our local gas station, Texaco gas station, and he would pump the gas, and he was really friendly and personable. I look forward to seeing him. And then he was gone for a year, and I just thought he took a vacation. And I later found out he was incarcerated, and I couldn't imagine what would he be incarcerated for. And the other thing that I was aware of in that was in terms of Jackie Robinson being a superstar baseball player and Howard being a service worker at the Texaco gas station, it seemed to me those were the two avenues for black people to get work. And it's something that didn't seem right about that to me. The other thing is in my 20s, I went with a black woman, and I remember not telling my liberal parents, because even though they were liberal and blacks and whites should be equal, I knew they would not approve of that. And finally, I have a memory of my very good friend, Jim. We both lived in New York City, and we were walking along an avenue at night, and a black man passed us. And after he passed us, we both were aware that we both had kind of a visceral reaction of fear. And then my friend Jim said, I wonder if he is also having a visceral reaction of fear passing us. So even though I'd say intellectually and belief-wise, I was for the equality of black and white people from my background, I also, again, really didn't know the experience and had some of the, I'd say, stereotypes of like fear. So that's what I would say my background, how my background informed me.
Thanks so much, Bob. So let's now go on to the phase 3, which is describing your stance. And why don't we go with Ruth? If you could take about 5 minutes to describe your stance as mindfully as possible. And really try to bring your whole sensibility or your whole experience to the description. I think that would be helpful so that Bob has a deeper sense of what your stance is. And then we'll ask Bob to reflect back what he heard, and you'll have a chance to correct it. Okay, Ruth?
Okay, thanks, Kirk. Thanks, Bob. So I'd like to say that my stance is apart from politics, because I think, this is all about people and our backgrounds and our thoughts, our individuality. Unfortunately, I have to recognize that there are movements, in my opinion, out there that don't want to make it about individuals. In fact, in some of the readings I've done, the whole idea of individualism is held suspect and even blamed for some of the issues we have these days. So my stance is that individuality does matter, that individuals are and should be our most primary focus. We're dealing with people first and foremost, not with groups. And I think that policy should take into account minorities within minority groups and not assume that, for instance, the Democrats are somehow more pro-Black community than the Republicans, because that ignores the fact that many Black Americans are Republican, just as Jews can be Republican. So, but first and foremost, my stance is that the individuals do matter, and we shouldn't assume that just because people have a certain skin color or religion, that they believe one thing. So that stance extends to some problems I have with the Black Lives Matter movement. I feel like it is trying to hijack the conversation and cast aspersions on anyone that doesn't want to agree with what they will pretty freely espouse as a Marxist platform, a platform that sort of wants to disrupt the nuclear family as we conceive of it now. I'm very liberal when it comes to gay rights, gay marriage. I'm all for that. But what I'm not for is a disruptive platform that points the finger at people who don't want to read the talking points as they've put out there, and call them racist if there's any kind of refusal. That to me is extraordinarily destructive, and yet that's what I see going on, and I'm really worried about it because I feel like there's been so much progress from the time I was a little kid until now. I don't want that vitriol and that what I see as intolerance to impede further progress, because there's a lot more progress to be made. When it comes to defund the police, I think that is dangerous for all of us. And I wish we could turn the conversation into the necessity for really, really constructive police reform, which is terribly needed. But when we have these vitriolic banner slogans, it distracts us from what's really, truly needed and what will be helpful and important for Blacks and for whites and for our ability to proceed in this journey we've taken to establish a really equal nation. Kirk, does that address what you'd like us to address?
That's fine. Yeah, thank you very much, Ruth. And Bob, could you reflect back as heartfully and mindfully as possible what you heard
Sure.
Ruth saying briefly?
Yeah, what I heard, Ruth, if I got it right, was the importance of the individual and not letting the group define the individual. That you, and that's a concern. And like we're doing it backwards, and that also, well, that's the key thing. That's a core thing of what I'm hearing. That and the concern that we've made progress, and when you have kind of mottos and slogans and extremism of everyone needs to agree with Black Lives Matter, or it polarizes it, you know, in terms of how they're judged. Because as you said, Jews can be Republican, Blacks can be Republican, and that. And the same thing with the defund the police, that you have a slogan that just so is extremist and polarizes things. So that's the core of what I heard.
Thanks. And Ruth, could you affirm or correct anything that you feel is maybe inaccurate and what Bob reflected back about your point of view?
I know about Bob, I think, yeah, that was a accurate summary. You know, and it's really heartfelt, and it comes from, yeah, I think.
I heard that, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bob, absolutely, you do get to say your 5 minutes. Yes, your stance.
My stance in terms of what the racial crisis has evoked really actually focuses a lot on Black Lives Matter, and actually feeling very supportive of it. And that what I look at, one of the things that will be a retort is, well, all lives matter. And saying Black Lives Matter to me doesn't mean, it's not saying isn't against all lives matter. In fact, I think Black Lives Matter would say all lives matter. And I think it's incredibly important to say Black Lives Matter because for years it's been on an unequal playing field for historically, and it still is. So what I mean by that is even dating back to kind of slaves are less than and slaves are property. In 1865, slavery was abolished in the 13th Amendment. However, that slavery, the loophole of slavery continued through the prison system, because basically if you're criminalized, that's a way to be enslaved. Forced free labor, being locked up. And there's one could say, well, there's a rationale for that, because if you commit a crime, you should be behind bars. However, it's interesting that about 40% of the population, the African American population, is behind bars, where the African American population is about 7%. So in my opinion, there's something screwy about that. That basically when you look at the inequity, that you can look at all different, systemically, you can look at all different systems. You have the educational system where often, and yeah, there's difference in terms of individuals. I agree with Ruth in that. So I am generalizing, but that I think, you know, just in terms of statistics, is that there's much more inequity in terms of the schools, in terms of, by and large, African Americans will go to poorer schools and have less resources. You can look at health, that by and large, African Americans don't have the health resources in terms of affording insurance or even getting insurance. So when it comes to current times, that what has really been brought out in terms of the pandemic is that it's the African Americans and people of color who are getting more COVID-19 proportionally and also dying more proportionally. There is, in terms of poverty and economics, that statistically much more African Americans are struggling with even making a subsistence living, and they're the ones disproportionately are being impacted by the economic devastation. So you have all this intersectionality where it just makes it more difficult for Blacks to, or African Americans to get an equal footing with whites. And I do think it's historic, it's systematic, it's organizationally. And so that's where I think it's needed to emphasize that Black Lives Matter. Is, and I can look at that in the police system. I think there's many good white police officers, but again, systematically, both unconsciously, semi-consciously, subconsciously, I think there's still some of the thing that African Americans are less than, and also they're threatening because they're going to mess up the economics. We need them for the economic servitude and other things like that. So there's an investment in terms of power and control. And the last thing I want to say is, what has felt really good to me is my optimism about what's going on right now. That I agree there has been progress, but there hasn't been enough progress. And to have all 50 states having protests in 30 plus days or whatever it is, and so much white consciousness seeing, I need to get on board and not just be a detached observer, to me makes me believe that, or my hope is that it's going to move to systemic change that moves us to have more of a connected humanity. And that's a good thing, a humanity of equality, and move towards more equal footing with people of color and minorities. So that would be my stance.
Thank you. Ruth, could you reflect back as mindful
Sure.
as possible what you've heard Bob say?
So Bob, what I heard you say is, number one, you're very supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement. And you mentioned that the inequalities hardly stopped with the end of slavery. They continued with inequality in education, in healthcare, and looking at the prison system, looking at how the inequality in proportions of inmates is quite evident. You mentioned that, yes, there's been some progress, but not nearly enough, that we need to move forward to change the system so that it embraces more change, and so that we all embrace one another with humanity, equality.
Yeah.
You said a lot of meaningful stuff, so I know I didn't adequately.
Absolutely, well stated. The only thing I would add is that, to me, what's so important is, ironically, it's Black Lives Matter, but what's so important is so much of the white consciousness and white people, to me, seem to me getting on board in a way that they never had, in an emotional way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're hearing that? Okay. Okay, good. Let's go on to phase 4, which is identifying, correcting, and admitting nuggets of truth about stereotypes. So let's begin with Bob. Bob, if you could take a couple of minutes to identify stereotypes you've perceived of your stance, your position.
And I'm doing that from the perspective of what Ruth was saying.
No, you're doing that from your perspective as, in terms of your stance, which was supporting Black Lives Matter, which is your liberal democratic point of view.
Oh, so you're talking about the stereotyping of the position. This isn't so much about Ruth, it's about how it would be stereotyped by the...
This is about you, your stance.
Yeah, how my stance would be stereotyped.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, well, I think one of the ways it would be stereotyped would be that let me see here. I think there would be a lot of anger about me as a white liberal trying to say what blacks need, and also an abandonment of whites and what whites need. I think that would be a stereotype. There would be a lot of anger about selling out, to selling out. What else would it be? That I have my head in the sand, or my head in the clouds. That I'm idealistic but not pragmatic. That in a sense I'm jumping over that. That basically I'm denying all the progress that's been made, and I'm making a big thing, making a mountain out of a molehill, and that African Americans, that they're not taking personal responsibility for themselves. They should be able to pull themselves by the bootstrap. So I'm making them, I'm enabling them by fighting for them in terms of what I think their needs are.
Okay, thanks. And now can you take a few moments to correct that point of view? What do you see as false and misleading about those stereotypes?
What did I just say about?
You don't have to cover all of them, but just...
Yeah, I definitely look at it that is a correction of that view is I am not saying, to me it's a both and. I'm not saying that African Americans, all of us, shouldn't take personal responsibility for themselves. I'm just saying you need to do the context of them taking personal responsibility with all that's going against them. So that's one correction of the view, that I'm letting African Americans off the hook in terms of being lazy or whatever, and not standing up, that they still need to take their own active position, which I think Black Lives Matter does. So that's one correction of that view. What else did I say? Is I'm not sure what else to say. I don't think I'm overstating. The correction of the view is I'm not overstating what I think. I don't think it's just I'm overreacting or whatever. So in terms of what's going on, so the big correction of the view is what I just said, that they're taking what I'm saying is not giving them responsibility, or they could. So that would be the big correction, I would say. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay. And now can you identify nuggets of truth to the stereotypes of your point of view?
Yeah. The nugget of truth is I I think it's a nugget of truth in terms of I could, I could have my head in the sky or in the sand. I don't know which direction I'm going in. But where I want things to be better, and so could kind of not look at the kind of some of the messy stuff, and in particular in terms of some extremism, that it could be that I'm not being strong enough in terms of I don't agree with the extremism of looting and rioting, and that would be a way to me of not taking personal responsibility. So that would be where I think it can fit.
Thank you. Ruth, can you now identify stereotypes of your position?
Yeah, I guess the most evident one is that I'm racist as a right-leaning American, white, and Jew. That being the harshest stereotype. I'm insensitive to the plight of marginalized communities. I don't fully understand. And I'm a victim of my own white privilege. I would say those are a few pretty prevalent stereotypes. And I'll say in correcting, Kirk, can I correct those stereotypes?
Go on to correcting.
I, from deep down in my heart, will say I'm not racist. I don't know how some people might define me to be racist, but I will use my own definition. I love people who are people, who are loving and show respect for people and want good things for people. It doesn't matter to me. I try to read, so I am trying to become more aware. So I can't correct the idea that I don't understand, because that's the nugget of truth. I don't understand a lot about this world, know a lot about a lot of people, and I don't understand what Blacks in America have gone through entirely, because I haven't gone through it. But I read books from different viewpoints to better understand that. The policies I support are certainly not, in my opinion, oppressive. I would correct the view that I have sort of a white privileged view on policy by saying I actually take my lead from Black economists and Black sociologists who have a different view of things. So they speak out quite knowledgeably about certain left-wing policies that they think are very detrimental to the welfare of Blacks in America. So those policies I draw from people who've lived a life affected by racism, and they feel they know how to improve the economic well-being and the social well-being of members of their own community. So I don't trust myself as a white person to know, but I do trust Black economists, theorists, sociologists who've been through it. Nuggets of truth, like I said, I don't know everything. I haven't been through everything. I have a friend who has a cat, and the cat got away, and he had to follow the cat into other people's backyards, and he's Black, and he told me he was so nervous about maybe someone considering him a bad guy and getting shot by virtue of the fact he's Black. My eyes were open. I thought, yeah, he's not far off when it comes to that. So there we go, that nugget of truth, which is, I don't know everything. I can't possibly understand.
All right. Thank you both. Let's go on to phase 5. So phase 5 is a chance to ask a question that you're curious about of Bob or Ruth. And again, attempt to come from a place of being curious, of really wanting to know, really trying to understand, you know, where is Bob or Ruth coming from on this? So try to frame your questions without answers in the questions or accusation in the question as much as you can. And I'll work with you on that if it seems like there's some problem in framing the question from a curious point of view. So perhaps we can start with Bob asking the question of Ruth, coming from that place.
Okay. Is Ruth, I'm wondering, what's the policy you would look at in terms of our prison system and incarceration, that 40% of African Americans make up that population, while only 7% of African Americans make up the US population?
Yeah, it's a troubling statistic. And again, I don't want to overstate my knowledge of the issue. I think a lot of progress needs to be made in looking into why people are put in prison. Why is it that it seems a lot of Black Americans go to prison for drug offenses and whites don't? So I'm not going to disagree with you that it's a huge problem. And it's one that deserves a lot more attention. I also think, though, that if you listen, you know, as you probably have to Black theorists and speakers on the right, they will point to the very sensitive issue of Black crime, Black families in primarily inner cities, and this idea of why is the family structure so fragmented, and does that play a role in the high rates of inner city crime? I don't want to speak as somebody who knows about this intimately, but I think that people who can speak to this need to be listened to and not written off as Uncle Toms, which I find horrific, right? For somebody with a view, a Black person with a view that happens to be conservative, to be written off as an Uncle Tom is, in my opinion, incredibly racist, because they too have perspectives to contribute. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
But I definitely agree that it's a problem and it needs to be improved, examined, but fairly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ruth, you have a question for Bob about his stance here. Do you have a question for Bob?
Okay. Yeah.
I didn't want to hear the question. I was a little scared.
Sorry, no, that was my fault. My battery was giving me some kind of weird sign. Bob, I wanted to ask from you, why do you think Black conservatives seem so marginalized in the discussion and by the mainstream media?
Good question. Yeah, it's part of the polarization is that I'm certainly guilty of, that I guess I'll answer in a different way. It goes in terms of the next phase, but that as we've been talking today, I realize it's so important to look at personal responsibility as well as systemic oppression. And certainly, so they should be acknowledged, absolutely. And when I think about, and I think it's a both and, it's truthful, that basically often African-American families are fractured. And then, yeah, from a psychodynamic view, I could see, even an existential theme view, that they would they could end up committing crimes, and simultaneously, that system is within another system of, I believe, systematic oppression from society. And so how you draw the line, I don't know. But that I know that's not directly answering it. I'm just saying they're correct, I believe. And that's not the whole picture. Just like the other isn't the whole picture, that it's just systemic and it doesn't move into the fractured family system. They're intricately involved, intertwined. And so I think not being listened to is, I don't know how to say that, answer that, other than that in itself that's what we're trying to do here, to listen to each other. You know, I think it's just very polarized on both ends. And that's too bad, that's sad. I know for myself, I mean, this is the big example, but I'll use it, is that, you know, I can hate Trump for how he hates people, or my perception. And I know I deal with this I can deal with this with liberal and conservative. So I think both sides marginalize the other side. And so, yeah, conservative sociologists, whatever, other people on the left could say, oh, it's not, what you're saying, as you said, is insensitive, or I don't even want to hear you, or whatever. And that's a pity.
Great. Okay, let's go on to the last phase, phase 6. So this is the discovery phase. I'd like you both to take a moment, collect your breath, and really try to get a sense of what you learned about each other, whether you felt like you were heard by each other. Do you have a sense, a greater sense of your partner's story and point of view? Can you relate to it in any different way than when you began? And finally, do you feel like there is any room for common ground here? Do you share some theme that came out of your dialogue? And, you know, could that lead to some kind of action on your part or further discussion? So why don't we start with Ruth? Ruth, what have you learned?
Sure. Bob, as you were talking, I had this impulse to like interrupt you and say, oh, when can we talk more about this? Because I think there's so much room for diving down into specifics. I think that in listening to you, I am disabused of this notion that you are maybe arrogant in your position. I think in social media and on the news, when people are very often just trying to prove their point, the thought is, oh, they're so arrogant, they think they know everything. But these kind of dialogues make it very clear that if anything, we're both coming from a position of feeling a little helpless, but benevolent and truly concerned. So that immediately opens up, I think, that space for more dialogue, for a more genuine discussion of what's going on and how can we fix it, because clearly, you know, the current venues in the media and in Washington are just not doing the job they need to do because they're not listening to people like us.
Okay.
So I thank you for being so candid, for, you know, opening my eyes to your position and your spirit.
Thanks, Ruth.
Okay, appreciate that. Bob, can you talk about what you've discovered?
Yeah, sure. I definitely felt heard. Thank you, Ruth. I felt just very much heard. There were two things that I related that felt good, that I just connected with. One is what you were saying, Ruth, about not understanding or not knowing everything. And I certainly feel that for myself. at the same time, I'm glad it didn't come across, and you certainly didn't come across that way. I certainly feel I can be arrogant. And I try not to let that, define me too much. So I really have that's what I want to keep on opening up to, that I don't understand everything. I want to hear everyone's point of view and kind of take it in. And so again, I appreciate that, Ruth, in terms of talking to you today. The other thing, what really struck me that I learned from today, what I just said in the last phase, was that powerful dynamic and tension between what is personal responsibility and family dysfunction, and not to ignore that, versus what is systemic and oppressive differences that where it's not even about negative personality, negative in a way personal responsibility, but it's coming from systemic motivation. So that was good. I want to sit with that more. I would enjoy talking to you more, Ruth. I value your intelligence, and it's nice to connect in our differences. I guess that would be the action plan, to talk more. So that's how I would, that's what I would say.
Thanks,
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bob. We have a couple of minutes on this. Is there anything more that either of you would like to identify about common ground, or something that you share? I think you've implied some of that, but anything more explicit that either of you would like to identify as common?
Well, I'll say something. I find it fascinating in terms of what we started out, in terms of the common ground, and then to me the incredibleness of the human agency, and how we take in what we take in. Because I think it's really interesting that both you, Ruth, and I come from middle-class Jewish families, from Michigan and New York, but we have that's a similar milieu, and we've gone in certainly some different directions in how we look at, in this case, the racial crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love to meet up, and the both of us sharing our differences with a group of Black Americans from different political perspectives, everything from Nation of Islam to much more conservative perspective, and ask them how Blacks and Jews might work more constructively together, especially given some of the incidents of the past week. In fact, that's been one of it brings me to tears. I don't understand why Blacks and Jews aren't coming together on these issues. I'm heartbroken about that.
Yeah, I second that, Ruth. That really excites me. And I find it intriguing, which I knew going in, that we're two whites talking about the racial crisis. And I presume most of the participants are white. And yet I still think it's important, because we need to talk up for ourselves in terms of what our experience is, or else we'll just be silent. However, I would love to get into more of a diversity in terms of this dialogue. So I'm on the same page as you on that.
Mm-hmm. That would be a really cool next step. I mean, yeah, because I have so many questions I want to ask, and I just want to listen to, the dialogue that ensues. It's an important bridge to build.
I want to resonate to that, and also emphasize that this is very much a first step and a beginning in opening these kind of encounters, with people of diverse backgrounds, etc. So perhaps that can be a next step. It certainly feels important to me as well. So thank you both so much for giving of your time and your lives for this this inquiry and meeting. I feel like it was more than just a meeting of two talking heads. So appreciative of that. I think that's more of what we need. So very quickly, I just want to emphasize the ground rules for this segment. And they can really be summarized in one sentence, and that is to attempt to learn about and understand each other without trying to persuade each other of your points of view, and to come from a place of curiosity rather than presumption. We take just 2 minutes to decide on which topic you're going to focus on. We recommend that you address the racial issue as Bob and Ruth had just demonstrated, but it's not necessary. We also suggest the pandemic or economic crisis, if those feel more compatible for both of you. So please take 2 minutes to decide which topic you'll focus on. So I'm assuming everybody has chosen their topic. And now I'd like you to begin with phase one, visualizing the dialogue. Take about 3 minutes to, again, check in with what you're feeling, sensing, thinking about connecting with that partner on the particular topic you're going to discuss. And after that, take a couple of minutes to get a feel for the more of that partner. Get a feel for their humanity beyond the simple category or label that might have first come to mind in regard to that partner. Okay? So
All right.
Take 5 minutes for this. So now I'd like you to go into phase two, telling your partner basically what it was like to grow up in your family system, cultural system, and how that system treated the other in the context of the particular issue you're focusing on. Okay, and we'll give you 5 minutes each to do those descriptions. Okay, let's please now go on to phase 3, which is describing your stance to your partner. And remember, you have about 5 minutes to describe the stance as mindfully and heartfully as possible. And then your partner has about 2 minutes to reflect back what they heard, the essence of what they heard in your stance. And the original speaker gets a chance to correct any inaccuracies. And then, of course, you switch roles. we are now ready for phase 4, which is identifying, correcting, and admitting stereotypes of your position. And you'll have 2 minutes, the speaking partner will have 2 minutes to identify the stereotypes of their position, and then 3 minutes to correct the false and misleading aspects of that stereotype as they see it. And then a final 2 minutes to identify any nuggets of truth in the stereotype. And then we'll have you switch roles. So you'll have 7 minutes each for this exercise. Then phase 5 is a chance to ask a policy question. And we try to do this again as profoundly as possible from a place of curiosity and not assumption or a kind of question with the answer in it. Okay, we have reached the final stage of the Experiential Democracy Dialogue. This is a chance to convey to your partner what you learned, uh, what you discovered about feeling heard by this partner, about the partner's story and whether you feel a resonance to it, and any common ground that might have been achieved between the two of you, and also any potential for taking action of some kind, perhaps social action, based on your dialogue with your partner. You have 5 minutes each for this. I hope this was an illuminating, informative, and maybe trailblazing event for you. And I much appreciate all of your participation in this endeavor. And I really hope that this can be one spark in a whole cascade of sparks that promote these kind of dialogues throughout the country. I feel we're really, really desperate for that.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for coming also. I want to thank you, Kirk, for creating this incredible experiential democracy dialogue. Thank you very much for that. And I really appreciate people coming, because this was an amalgam. I presume most of the people were here either through EHI or EHNW. So it's really nice to have the intermingling. And hopefully that will continue in the future with each of our events.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Bob. And again, thank you and Ruth for your generosity of time. And
Thank you, Kirk. Thanks, Bob.
Likewise, Ruth.